Thanks so much.
All right. So yeah, my name is Francisco. I am currently a technical advisor for OpenZeppelin. I was the leading the development of the open source libraries, including OpenZeppelin contracts, the wizard, upgrades tooling, and a bunch of other things at OpenZeppelin. And now I am helping along with a few projects, among them everything related to cross-chain communication, interop in Ethereum and beyond. So what I thought I would do today is give an overview of what these systems are doing and what makes them complex. The reason why I want to do this is that, I was a smart contract developer for many years, and I'm sure many of you are as well. And when you develop smart contracts, you're in a very simple environment, quite a simple environment, where you can write your smart contract, you can call functions in the same environment on other contracts, you can read values, you can read balances, send tokens, do a bunch of stuff. If there's something you don't like, you can revert and undo everything. So it's an environment with really nice properties to program, and it can be quite simple. But when you start doing cross-chain things, the true nature of these systems, of these blockchains, starts to leak, and starts to really show and make things more complex. And when you begin to see these protocols and how you use them and what properties they have, you may not really know where they come from. And so I think it can be useful to get a little overview of that to navigate this space. So first, I want to review how does one, as a user of the chain, get to know the state of the chain. And so we have a couple of options. We can run a full node to follow every block. That's what we see above. We can follow every block. We can validate the consensus rules, and then we can go through each transaction and execute every transaction and reconstruct the state. And in that way, we can get a copy of the state on our computer and read from it. And we can get every balance, every piece of state, every event from there quite easily. But we might not want to do that. So we have a range of other options and things that we can do. We can run a light client where we validate the consensus of the chain, but we're not really re-executing everything. We're to some degree trusting the consensus to tell us what the state is, and then we can access it from there. Or we can just say, consult with a trusted RPC. We can just hit Infura and trust them to tell us what the state of the chain is. So what we're going to have in a cross-chain system is two chains where, not too dissimilar to what we have here with a user reading from the chain, we actually want another chain and possibly a smart contract on this other chain to get to know the state of chain A in this case, and read from it and interact with it. And so we have to ask exactly how is it going to do that. And we actually have a range of options that is similar to what we as users can do. We're going to be able to run something like full nodes or something like light clients or something like trusted RPCs. So we're going to look at that now. First of all, this is going to be able to happen in two different ways. In one way, the chains themselves are going to sort of provide this cross-chain link by default. It's what I try to symbolize here. Each block of the chain is going to have a view into some other chain where you're going to be able to read states, and that's going to be provided by the chain itself. And in other cases, you're going to be able to do that with a smart contract inside of the execution environment of the chain. You're going to be able to get a view of some other chain. But actually, this diagram that we see here and that we saw above is really hiding the complexity, and it's too simple so as to be not really accurate. And the reason why it's not accurate is due to some kind of fundamental problem of cross-chain communication. And that is the possibility of reorgs. So what can happen when we have a simple link here from like the latest block to the latest block of the other chain is that while we might produce a new block and read this latest block of the chain, this block might be susceptible to being reorged. And what can happen is chain A in this case, ended up going on a different direction, producing different blocks that do not include the one that we read in the latest block in chain B here. And what this can mean is that we might have seen a transaction and thought that it went through, but actually in the real tip of the chain, it ended up being reverted. And this is a safety violation that is going to be key to avoid. So we can solve for this in two different ways. One is if the chain A here has some notion of finality, we're going to use that. And what that means is there's going to be some block in the past that is guaranteed that it will no longer be reorged. And so instead of reading from the latest, from the tip of the chain, our most recent block on chain B is going to read from an older block that is represented here by this green state that we know is not going to be reorged. So this will depend on the chain. For example, on Ethereum, the time to finality is about 15 minutes. And so we're going to be reading a block that is 15 minutes old. In other chains, it's going to be instant. In other chains, it's actually, there is no real finality. It's going to be probabilistic, most notably Bitcoin. And so we're going to have to wait up until some threshold where we are pretty sure, although it's not guaranteed, that the block is not going to be finalized. And in the case of Bitcoin, for example, it's going to be 60 minutes. So this is one of those things that I think some of you may have seen, like you transfer assets from one chain to another, and it takes 15 minutes. You're not sure why. This is the reason. And the other way that you can solve for this is to make the two chains reorg together. So in this case, when the chain above reorgs, the chain below is also going to reorg. So like from the start, you're going to have to make a commitment to reorg together. This also solves the problem. And you don't have to read an old state, an old block here to be safe. So we've seen quite a few options now of how to develop these systems. They can be built into the chain, or they can be based on smart contracts. You can wait for the finality of the remote chain, or you can commit to reorg together with it. And then you can have different degrees of security or trust assumptions, such as embedding a full node, or a validating bridge, which is similar, or a light node, or some trusted third party. And the right combination of these things is going to depend on the nature of the blockchains that you're connecting. So if you're connecting layer one to a separate layer one, like say you're connecting Ethereum and some Cosmos chain, you are probably going to want to wait for finality, because these are different chains with different rules, different validator sets, and sort of different cultures even. And so committing to reorg together is going to be really hard. It's also, for similar reasons, probably going to be smart contract based. And because embedding a full node as a smart contract into the chain is not really viable because it's a constrained execution environment, you're probably going to be placing some degree of trust into third parties, or a set of third parties, or a separate protocol that is dedicated to this. In the case of layer twos, you can do a bit better than this, because say for reading the L1 state from a layer two, by construction, the layer two node is going to have a full node of the layer one. So it's kind of right there, very handy. You can take it immediately. It's going to be the embedded node kind. And it's probably going to be built in. You don't need to make it as a smart contract, and you're not going to be able, you're not going to need to wait for finality, because again, by construction, these two chains are going to be reorging together. For reading the L2 state from the layer 1, you again have a similar, similar situation in terms of reorgs. These chains are going to be reorging together, but it's not going to be built in. The rollup layer 2 is an application, so you're going to make it as a smart contract on top. And it's going to be the validating bridge kind, which is similar to the embedded node. You're kind of having a full node inside of the layer 1, but you do it in a way that the constrained environment is not an issue. So you would do fault proofs, or you would do zero knowledge proofs. And in the case of an L2 reading from another L2, you have the advantage that you are on the same sort of umbrella. So you again are going to reorg together, but the actual mechanism is going to be a little bit more complicated. So I'm not going to go into in depth here. So let's assume now we have solved this. As we've seen, it's not trivial at all. There are many choices to make, and nuances and security things to analyze. But we can assume that we've solved that. What we get is some mechanism to authenticate remote chain state. So we are able to kind of construct this link that we were drawing up there. But this is not really what we want for the end developer, right? So we want to know now, how do we get from there to developer-friendly APIs, right? We want something that looks more like this, where within the same chain, we can call functions very easily, get results. We want to approximate that within the constraints of the finality risk and everything that we discussed above, but we want it to be developer-friendly. So I want to discuss now how we get from a mechanism for remote chain state authentication into a potentially developer-friendly API. So what does the authentication of remote chain state primitive give you? It can be a number of things. The rawest thing that it might give you is the block headers of the remote chain. And this does contain all of the information that you want. Like using this, you can prove that anything happened on the other chain, or that the state is in a certain way. But it's going to be really cumbersome to use, because you're going to have to provide some sort of Merkle proof, and it's going to be a complex process. So it's not the developer-friendly thing that we're looking for. You might have state roots, but you're gonna of the remote chain, right? But you're gonna get a similar problem there. It's not gonna be developer-friendly. You're gonna have to provide Merkle proofs again of the state that you want. And additionally, you have another problem, which is that using state roots, you can, for example, prove that some token on the remote chain has a certain balance, like that some account, some user has some balance of a token on the other chain. You can, in theory, do that, but it's difficult to make that into a general purpose primitive. That is because it depends on the storage layout of the contract. This is not something that is standard. You don't know exactly in what storage slot of the contract you're going to find a certain balance. So it doesn't make for a friendly and secure and reliable and general purpose primitive on its own either. The next thing that's a little bit more useful is the logs, that is, the events that the contracts emitted. And it's a little bit better. It doesn't have the problem of the storage layout that we said before, but we might consider that it has other problems. So, for example, if you have the logs of the remote chain, you're able to prove that a certain token transfer happened, but you might not entirely be entirely sure that it is the specific token transfer that you care about. So, for example, if you are on chain B and you're waiting for some payment that happened on chain A in order to mint an NFT, you might see a transfer from the right address to the right address and for the right amount, but how can you be sure that it is the payment that you're waiting for, and that it is not some random unrelated payment that happened 2 weeks ago, right? So you don't really have all of the information that you might want from reading arbitrary logs. So more normally, what you're going to find in these cross-chain protocols is that a subset of the state or a subset of the logs is going to be made available. And so what's going to happen is that some specific contract is going to be designated as a bridge contract, and it's going to be sort of the entry point for this cross-chain communication. So in the case of the paying for an NFT, you're going to have a contract that processes the payment on the chain A, and then talks to this bridge to say, hey, the payment happened, and it was for the correct amount, and this is the ID of the NFT that is being minted, and the order ID, and so on. And then this gets emitted as a log and sent, or not sent yet, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but it's going to be sort of registered on the chain state, and you're going to be able to authenticate it on chain B to prove that the payment, like the exact payment that you wanted, happened. And so this is going to be known as a messaging primitive. These little bits of these logs that we're going to be emitting are going to be designated as cross-chain messages, and they're going to come from the logs of this special purpose bridge contract. So what is contained in a message? Like when we send a message, what is the developer going to have to specify? We're going to have some basic things that we want. There's going to be a payload that includes the parameters, and obviously there's going to be some sender, right? We want to be sure that the message that we are seeing was sent by a specific account, which is like a very important piece related to the whole authentication deal. Now, these two things are the basic things that you're going to want, and this is going to have the shape of a broadcasting primitive. This can be useful. In fact, Arbitrum recently released a broadcasting contract that does exactly this, and it can be useful for a wide range of use cases. But normally, you want something that's a little bit more specific, because what you want to do is replicate the same chain interaction where you interact with a specific receiver, right? You send them a piece of information, you call a message on a specific receiver. So normally, cross-chain messages are going to have two more parameters, which are the destination, right? The chain where you're going and the receiver of the message that you intend. And so we could call this a point-to-point messaging primitive. And this is starting to look a lot more like the kinds of protocols that we know about, like Hyperlane and Axelar. They kind of have these basic sets of parameters because they're trying to replicate this experience that we have on the same chain on the cross-chain setting. Now, one thing that we probably want to add here that we shouldn't forget is replay protection, right? Like I said before, when you see, say, for example, a payment, you want to be sure that it is the specific payment that you're waiting for, and you also want to be sure that you haven't already processed that payment. So normally these cross-chain messaging protocols are going to have a built-in replay protection mechanism that could be either managed by adding some nonce in the message, or more likely by marking certain specific logs as already processed in the system on the destination chain. Now, we have to consider now, we have this primitive of chain state authentication, and we are building on top of that a messaging abstraction. And so our source contracts on the source chain are going to be able to send off messages, and they're going to be able to say, well, I want to send this message to this receiver. But something is missing here. And it should be obvious that something is missing, because we know that chains are not free, right? We have to pay for the block space that we use. And so when you emitted the message right here, you paid for some gas to write the log into the state, but you are implicitly requesting for some execution to happen on the receiver. And you didn't pay for it, right? Because nothing in here, you just emitted a log. You didn't pay for any execution on the destination chain, and it's not going to come for free. So there is a little piece here, not so little, that we are missing to get the kind of experience that we want, that is usually called relaying, right? Once we have inserted this message into the state, once that we made it available to be authenticated, we want it to actually be relayed to affect some change on the destination chain. And so this is going to imply that we're going to need quite a few parameters more in our bridge to actually process this cross-chain message related to relaying. And so it's going to get a bit more complex here. So the one thing that we're going to need is, these things are going to be similar. The first two things are going to be similar to just sending a transaction to any chain. We're going to need to specify a gas limit, so up to how much gas do we want to pay. And we're going to have to say how much are we willing to pay for it. Now, both of these things are actually going to present a problem for the developer, not so much for the protocol, mainly for the developer. Why? Because the exact gas limit that something will cost, it can depend on many things that are dynamic, right? It can depend on the parameters. It can depend on whether some certain storage slots are warm or cold. And in some cases, you can have some sort of loop where maybe there's a bound, but it can be longer or shorter. And so the gas limit is not fixed. And so the developer is going to have to specify something. You're going to have two options here. You can make your source smart contract right here fix some gas limit that they're willing to pay. And maybe you can compute some upper bound on like how much it's going to cost to process the message on the delivery side. Or what you can do is also to just, allow the end user that is off-chain that can estimate the gas that it's going to take to process the message on delivery to inject it as a parameter in the transaction. So like the contract is just going to say, hey, I'm going to trigger the message, but you can tell me how much of a gas limit I should specify based on your estimation. And then we're going to have to specify the gas price, right? We're going to have two separate chains. They're going to have different gas markets. So the price is going to be different on the source chain and destination chain, right? So we need to specify it. And we can't just ask like, okay, tell me what the gas price is on the destination chain, because this again requires cross-chain communication, right? You would need to read cross-chain state, and this is kind of circular, right? It's what we're trying to do. So again, here you have the option of just allowing the end user to inject it in their transaction. They're off-chain. They can observe both chains and just say, all right, send this message and you're going to have to pay this much price. Another option that you have is to have some sort of oracle where some party is observing the chain B and injecting the gas price of chain B into chain A for the execution layer to use. And that's quite common too. Now, both of these things, you're making estimations. Even the oracle might have a bit of a delay. So you have the risk of overpaying, right? You might go on chain B and execute, deliver the message and execute it and all, and have a little bit of surplus. So another parameter that you want to include in your cross-chain message is some refund receiver, where whatever was left over from the gas, you refunded to the sender on the destination chain. You could try to do, refunds on the source chain, but this starts to get really complicated. So this is the simplest thing that can be done. And lastly, you also need to consider that the gas token might be different on the destination chain, right? So this is not exactly a parameter. but something to solve. And finally, we need to think that we're going to be relying here on a relayer that is a third party to observe that the message was emitted and take it and submit it on chain B. So that's going to be a service that they're going to be providing. And so we're likely going to have to pay a little bit of a fee for that. So this is, starting to get complex, but if you want to try to approximate what you had right here with multiple chains, you certainly have to think about all this. Now, this can actually fail in some ways. That is important to consider, and will also have an effect on the API that we design. Why? Because as we said, right, we had to make some estimation here for the gas limit and for the gas price. And we said there might be a surplus that might have to be refunded. But also what can happen is we may not have specified enough. And so we're going to have a failure mode where the gas limit or the gas price that we specified was not sufficient. And so we're going to need some sort of API to allow the sender to maybe top up the gas or to somehow manually retry the submission of the message on the destination chain. And we might want to consider that if they never do that, do you want the message to just sit there waiting to be retried, or maybe you want to set some expiration timestamp and include that in the message by default. Now here, what I wrote also is that the execution of the message delivery could could fail and revert. And this is not necessarily a problem for the message protocol, the messaging protocol itself, because it can just consider that it successfully delivered the message and that the fact that it reverted was an application problem. And I haven't checked, but I believe this is probably what most protocols do. So the thing that's important to know about this is that when you are designing a cross-chain application, you have to make sure that you never revert on the processing of a cross-chain message, or that you have some clean way to recover from that. Because in the worst case scenario, there may be not only information that is never delivered, but potentially assets that end up being locked. So putting all of that together, we might end up with an API on the bridge on chain A that looks like this. Your request to send a message, specify payload, destination, chain, and receiver, and then whatever parameters are needed to actually get that to happen on the destination chain. And so any protocol that you see that does cross-chain messaging will probably have something like this. And these are the reasons why. Finally, one thing that I want to note, it's very important, is that observability here becomes really crucial. This, we're going to have quite a bit of asynchrony here between, sending the transaction, getting it included in the source chain, getting it processed by the cross-chain protocol, then getting it included on the destination chain, and so on. There's going to be quite a few intermediate states from the message having been sent to maybe it's waiting to be, it's been authenticated and it's waiting to be relayed, or maybe it was relayed and the relaying failed and you need to retry it, and so on. So there's quite a bit of information here that we want the user and the application and the wallet potentially to become aware of, that is not obviously included in a normal explorer like Etherscan, because it's not aware of everything that's going on. And so this can really harm the user experience. It can be really common to try to, or at least at some point, to try to transfer an assets to some other chain and feel like you're shooting them into a black hole and just waiting until seeing them show up. And it can be really a terrible experience. And this is because these systems are so complex and they didn't have the right observability mechanisms built into them. But it is a very important thing to include when designing them. So these are the things that I wanted to share. Hopefully they're useful to understand the cross-chain protocols that you're using, or as input into whatever cross-chain protocols you design, or whenever you design an application and use one of these in them. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Awesome. Yeah, look at that comment. Great comment.
Want to mention oh, thank you. I used I think this is a great resource. It's a little bit academic, but a lot of the information that I just described, you can find it here, and you can find.
Can you drop the URL in the in our private chat, and I can get up on screen.
It's a really great report, and
it was
a lot of what I said, you can find it here.
I love like how you structure the section. How I don't know if we were using a mirror or what exactly this tooling, this supporting.
This is TL draw.
Oh, TL draw is like TLDR.
Yes.
On that. No, it was great. Maybe if we can like export this as a PDF just to share like with hackers after, would be amazing.
I'll send it to you guys.
Yeah, I don't know if we have much questions on the YouTube channel. I know everyone was loving it. I know we are kind of running a bit behind for the next section as well, right, Whit? So I don't know if you have any question for Francisco, or if Francisco wants to give like the last words of consideration, and then we move for the next section.
Yeah, that works. Yeah. If Francisco any closing remarks, then it's awesome, and tell people, you know, if you want to, like how they can ping you with questions or reach you, or if Twitter handle or.
My Twitter handle is @frangio_. Happy to open for DMs there. I don't have anything else to add. I think I got it all out there. So I'm glad you all enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.